Hello students, welcome to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. Today we are going to deal with the subject communication skills for healthcare managers. The topic for today is communication channels and types in business context. Now let's start with understanding what is communication. Now communication is something that is absolutely essential for the functioning of any organization, whether it is a healthcare organization, whether it is a service organization, or whether it is a manufacturing organization. Each organization will have to will depend on communication. Now communication will ensure that there is smooth operation and smooth delivery of services. It will also help us to maintain relationship with our patients as well as stakeholders. It ensures information reaches the right person or people at right time. Now what we are going to do specifically today is communication channels. Now let's understand what is a channel. Channel basically refers to the path through which the communication is going to flow, right? Now it represents a position or point in the organization. That is exactly what channel refers to, right? Then moving on, communication follows the hierarchy and lines of authority. So the channels that follow the authority are called as channels of authority. Now based on authority, channels can be classified into two. One is formal, the other one is informal. And based on medium, that is the channel that is based on medium, the communication can either be verbal or non-verbal. Moving on, let us understand what is formal communication and what is informal communication. Formal communication is basically something that is absolutely official, and this will flow through channels in the approved format to accomplish their task. Okay. Now when we are talking about informal communication, it is mostly unofficial, and the direction of flow of each of these is going to be haphazard. It can move in any direction. There is no proper format in which the information is going to flow when we are talking about informal communication. Now let's do in detail what is formal communication and what is informal communication. Now talking about the context of formal communication. Now basically formal communication refers to work related messages. Now for example, a healthcare worker will use formal communication when they are trying to explain the policies to the patient or their families, or what are their rights, duties, responsibilities, etc. So that is where formal communication is used. Moving on, we will understand what are the tools of formal communication. Now the forms of formal communication is usually written communication. Now this written communication can be in the form of letters, memorandums, reports, proposal, or any kind of special bulletins that are placed in the hospital, or emails. So the forms of oral communication in terms of formal communication could be through conversations, it could be through interviews, meetings and conferences. Now moving on, we will understand what are the patterns of formal communication. Now they can be either centralized or decentralization of authority. When we are talking about centralized pattern, then in that case information flows will be limited in context and the direction of flow. When we are talking about downward communication, then in this case it is more limited to orders and instructions. And in decentralized organization, communication flows are more active, and they go to different persons and they are entrusted with decision making authority. Now let's take example here. If we are talking about a physician and nurse communication, then doctors are authorized to hold all information, and then they are required to pass on the information to the nurses for further care. So nurses have to follow the instruction, and they will have to seek information from physician as and when the need is going to arise. Now talking about the direction of flow, like I told you, there are three directions of flow in formal communication. Those are upward, downward and horizontal. When we are talking about downward communication, it mostly is in the form of either orders, instructions, and there could be information about what are the goals of the organization, what are the policies, and what are the procedures, what are the standard operating procedures of the organization, how are they supposed to run, etc. Moving on, the upward communication. Now upward communication is basically any kind of reports from the staff okay. Then compliance reports, and if they have any suggestion or maybe if they have any ideas, then that will come in your upward communication. Then you have horizontal communication. Now basically in horizontal communication, information is basically exchanged between the functional departments or departments on the same level for achieving better coordination and understanding. Then moving on, let us understand what are the networks of formal communication. So basically we have 5 networks. What are those? We have chain network, circle network, all channel network, wheel network and Y network. Now what is a chain network? A chain network is basically a vertical communication system where the message is going to flow up and down the hierarchy, and this is going to be between the superior and the subordinate or subordinate and superior. Now typical example could be in a religious gathering or maybe in military services, where in the information is flowing from the superior to subordinate or from subordinate to the superior. Moving on, we have circle network. Now what is a circle network? So basically in a circle network, a communication pattern is formed where members are all arranged in a circular pattern, okay, and each member is you have basically 2 members, 3 members we have. So basically circle network is communication pattern where members are arranged in a circular and each person communicates only with 2 adjacent members, that is one on the left and the other one on the right. Then you have all chain network. This is basically a decentralized network in which every member can communicate freely with everybody, that is with everybody else who is there in the basically when they are speaking to each other, and then this ensures that there is equal participation of all members. Then you have wheel network, also called as a star network. So basically in wheel network we have centralized network where a single leader communicates with all members, but as such the other members are not allowed to communicate among themselves. Then we have Y network. Now Y network is basically, you have one central leader and this central leader will connect with 2 other members, with the shape of Y. So these 2 members are somebody outside, okay, they are 2 isolated outside members, and as such these 2 members who are isolated do not get to talk to each other, okay. Then let's move on to informal communication. Now let's talk about the context of informal communication. Now informal communication is something that is absolutely spontaneous and it arises because you have that natural desire for people to communicate with each other. Now basically a very common form of informal communication is what we call as gossip and rumor. Now it usually occurs out of regular working hours and among people at one meeting place. It could be in their canteen, in sports ground, in parking lots, or even within the departments wherein they just sit and talk, right. So informal communication is that. Now what are the tools through which informal communication is done? Now this can be basically it is mostly oral. However, emails, messaging apps like WhatsApp or instant messaging, SMS, MMS, etc. is also a way through which informal communication can be done. Moving on, now what are the patterns? It gives rise to personal network based on social relationship and how how well you connect with somebody, or how much time you have in hand in order to share the information that you have. Now this is not necessarily information related to the organization, that could be something personal also, okay. So that is informal communication. Now informal communication is actually called as grapevine also. Now what is grapevine? Like I told you, it is something informal. It is not necessary that it has to be official. So basically it is unofficial. It is personal communication with a lot of distortion of information that is being passed from one person to another. Now the nature of grapevine communication or informal communication is it is oral. It is something that spreads really fast, and this is basically based on gossips and discussions. As such, there is no proof for what they are saying, and this is the role of grapevine is it is a major vehicle for rumors in organization. Now, types of grapevine network according to Kate Davis is basically of 4 types. First, in single strand, gossip, probability and cluster. Now, talking about the single strand. Now, basically this is only one way communication, serial communication from one person to another. I say something to another person, that person is going to go tell another person, and then the cycle continues. When we are talking about gossip, it is something that is absolutely random. It is something wherein you are sharing casually with people whom you have met just by chance. Probably you're just going into the canteen and saying, I have heard something like this about somebody. That is basically gossip. Then you have probability. Now, basically probability is wherein the messages are passed randomly to selected people whom you trust. Probably it is your friend, you share it with them, then you are moving on, you have another friend whom you call as a best friend, so you're sharing, then you have somebody at your office whom you share with. So that is probability, wherein the messages are passed randomly to selected people. Then you have clusters. Cluster messages are shared with trusted individual who further shares selectively. Now, probably I have shared, like I told you, I have shared it with my colleague. Now, this colleague of mine would want to go in and share it with her sister or mother at home. So, you are sharing the information or gossip or rumor with people whom you trust, okay, and then they are further sharing it with selective people whom they trust. Then moving on about what is gossip and what is rumor. Gossip is basically you are casually talking and mixing facts, assumptions and your own imagination. You talk about somebody and then you try to bring in your own assumptions, and then you have your own imagination about that particular topic that has actually become a gossip. Now, basically sometimes gossips can be constructive and they can be used for problem solving or discussing of problems also. Now, gossip also helps to reduce any kind of boredom, stress and work-life imbalances. Then talking about rumor. Rumor is something that is unverified and information spreads from one person to another. Now, rumor is something that can be true, it cannot be true. So, it can be true or it could be false, and the accuracy usually reduces rapidly. And rumor again can be positive or negative, that is, it can lead to a positive impact or it could even lead to a negative impact. Management may use rumors to prepare employees for some kind of change if required. Moving on. Now, let's understand what is verbal versus what is non-verbal communication. Now, verbal communication is basically wherein you are using words to deliver a message, whereas non-verbal communication takes place without the use of words. It could be, say, hand gestures or something like that. Okay, it often complements oral as well as written communication. Now, talking about non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication may be classified into certain groups. For example, kinesics, communication through body language, like postures, gestures and facial expressions is called as kinesics. Then you have proxemics, wherein you are maintaining physical distance while you are communicating. It depends on the nature of relationship that you hold with the person. Then you have artifacts. Communication is usually through the personal appearance. It could be through clothing, jewelry and lifestyle items. That is, you are going to communicate with that person based on their appearance. Okay. Basically, if you dress well, you have some people who really talk to you well, but if there is somebody who is underdressed, then the level of communication or the way you communicate is going to be totally different. Then you have visual aids. Again, especially in hospitals, there are a lot of non-verbal symbols that you use. For example, if somebody is pregnant, then in that case you have a symbol which shows that pregnant women are not allowed, with a cross mark there. And it could also be used as graphs, wherein a red sign could show, okay, if I'm talking about graphs, if the sales are increasing, then you have the graph that is going up, and probably if the graph shows down, then you might show that the sales are falling. Or images that also will help you to understand communication. So these are different types of ways through which you communicate in non-verbal form. Moving on, we have oral communication. Now, what is oral communication? Oral communication basically involves speaking and listening. While speaking, the speaker uses and observes non-verbal communication to make his communication effective. Let's look at the definition of oral communication. Oral communication is a process whereby information is transferred orally by a word of mouth in association with non-verbal cues to a receiver, who could be an individual, a group, or even audience in different contexts and forms, either aided or unaided by technology. Now let's understand oral communication little better. Now for example, when I am trying to tell you something, okay, if we are in a healthcare organization or a hospital, now what we do in such a case is, we sit and we say, these are the things that we need to do. This is something that has been done orally, and then it is word of mouth with, say, non-verbal cues also. This is what you have to do, I am pointing out at one by one. So basically what am I doing? I am using words as well as non-verbal cues by pointing out that this person has to do this. Now what is the importance of oral communication? Now communication is something that is very, very important, right? It is natural and it is essential. It is something that is indispensable. Okay, it is an indispensable form of human communication. Now talking about the healthcare interaction. Now what is the importance of oral communication in hospitals? Now here patients usually explain their problem. Then what happens is the doctor is going to ask questions, they are going to clarify, and then they are going to diagnose. Now how is this, all this is happening? This is basically happening through talking. Two people are conversing with each other. So there is oral communication. Now other than that, it is also time and cost saving. Now how is oral communication time saving? Now for example, you don't have to really go and type something and then send it, send across a message. Here you have instant message delivery. You go, you talk. And also if we are talking about calls, a lot of healthcare, a lot of telecom companies these days have reduced the calling charges. Right? Now if you are getting recharge done, basically you have free calls, and then internet is also free, a lot of things that are made easier. So that is how it is time and cost saving. Now not only that, it also is very effective in persuasion, right, wherein you can pursue somebody to do something. For example, you have a lot of people who motivate you to do something. This is basically through speeches, right? Then you have building relationship. It basically helps in encouraging some kind of discussion, trust, and social bonding. Now not only that, with proper oral communication you can motivate people, you can inspire them, you can energize people through the words that you are speaking to them. Now other than that, it also helps in learning. Now with oral communication you can basically teach people, you can train them, you can counsel them, right? And then it also aids administration. Basically with oral communication you can do good planning, the meetings that are held wherein you discuss what can be done, what is the agenda, what are the goals, what are the instructions that needs to be given to the middle level management or lower level management, and in case there are any conflicts, then those conflicts can also be resolved through oral communication. The channels of oral communication are face-to-face conversations, then you have telephone communication, meetings, discussions, interviews, speech and lectures, a lot of group discussion, conferences and seminars, counselings, and teleconferencing or video conferencing. Now what are the factors that will affect oral communication? First one is the physiological factors. Now for example, somebody who cannot talk properly, if they are speech defects, or probably they have problem in hearing, or somebody who has poor memory, then in that case the oral communication might not be very effective. It might affect the delivery of the message that is being delivered. And of course if somebody is hard of hearing, then they might not listen properly, and then they might not deliver the message correctly. Then you have psychological factors. For example, there are some people who might not have a very long attention span of listening, right? So that is one thing. Then the perception, how I perceive. If somebody is telling me something, how am I going to take it? How am I going to perceive it? And how am I interpreting what they are saying? And if there is some kind of motivation to it, then I'm going to feel motivated. If not, then there might be demotivation also. And the same information that I am receiving, I might go and give the same information according to my perception. Probably the other person might have not meant it that way, but what am I doing? Because of my own interpretation, I am giving information in that same manner. And of course, interpretation and personal biases are how I am perceiving it. Moving on, we have social factors. Now, like I told you, the appearance, right? Then the status differences and organizational affiliation also affect communication style and acceptance. Then you have noise factors. Now, these noise factors could either be mechanical, electronic, for example, wherein there is a teleconferencing going on, or maybe telemedicine wherein the communication was not correct, or there was some kind of disturbances in the internet or Wi-Fi connectivity. Then in that case, communication might not be apt, meaning to say that though communication has taken place, two people have sat, they have understood, but because of noise they couldn't hear each other, or the diagnosis couldn't be done correctly. Then you have language factors. Now, some people, there might be differences in language, the accent that they talk in, the jargons that are used. Some people might not be able to understand the jargons that you are using. For example, lama, dama, they might not understand, probably just saying it correctly. Then the grammar that you are using, making sure that correct words are used in order to ensure that there is more clarity. Then of course, you have cultural factors. There are certain cultural norms, like for example, in one language, aap might sound very cultural, whereas they might find it offensive, right? So every culture will have their own meaning of words, and it might affect the interpretation. And of course, skill differences, speaking and listening skills determine how effective oral communication can be. Moving back, with oral communication, there is feedback. Now, the term feedback is basically borrowed from cybernetics, and it is an essential feature of regulating self-regulating system. Now, it is also a corrective mechanism which brings the system back to original state, and it will help in preventing any kind of degeneration of information. Now, talking about the meaning, feedback is a response of receiver to the message of the sender. That is what they have understood. Now, feedback is the receiver's basic response to the interpreted message. This was given by Bartle and Martin, and according to Bowes and others, feedback is a response from the receiver that informs the sender how the communication is being received in general. Now, talking about the types of feedback, basically we have three types: verbal and non-verbal, positive and negative, critical, or what you call as evaluative. Verbal and non-verbal is basically expressed through words, or verbal, you are expressing it through words, or if it is non-verbal, then it could be either a smile or a sigh or something like that. It could be either positive or negative. Positive will encourage continuation, whereas if it is a negative feedback, then there might be discouragement, or you need to correct the behavior. Then you have corrective or evaluative, wherein feedback from experts or others that assess the performance, and if there is any improvement that is required. Moving on to the types of the styles of oral communication. So basically, meaning of style is the manner in which people are going to think, behave and communicate. Now, in oral communication styles, we have four types: aggressive, assertive, passive and hybrid. Now, talking about aggressive, the aggressive style is basically when somebody is dominating, or it could be accusatory, or they use more symbols like you statement. Assertive is something that is very clear, honest, crisp, you are respectful, and you use terms like I, okay, and this is something that is the most best type of communication, or the style that you can use. Passive, somebody is extremely submissive, they want to avoid conflict, or they allow others to dominate. And hybrid is combination of aggressive, assertive, passive. Now, which style to use when? Assertive will be preferred in normal and professional situation. Aggressive you are going to use if there is any emergency or there are any quick decisions that are required, or when you are facing any kind of indiscipline or bullying in the workplace. Passive is you are going to use when the issue is minor, probably day to day decisions that are taken. You don't have to really use aggressive kind of communication style, or when the emotions are high for the other person or you yourself are going through emotional turmoils, then in that case passive can be used. Or when you are dealing with a very powerful or aggressive person, then in that case also it is best to use passive style of communication. Now moving on, let's understand speaking and effective speech. Now what is speaking? Speaking is something that we do on daily basis or on special occasions. For example, it could be during marriages or during the death of somebody, or maybe in schools, colleges, or like I am now doing, I am speaking, right. So speaking is something that is a very important skill, and this is used both in personal as well as professional life. Okay, effective speech enhances confidence, recognition, influence, and career growth. The more effluently, the more better you speak, the more people are going to respect you for what you say. Right. Now we will understand what are the features of effective speech. First and foremost is you need to be very clear. You need to use simple language. You don't have to use high-fi words that are not required. You also need to ensure that your ideas are properly organized, so that when you are speaking the other person understands well, and plus making sure that your body language is also aligning with what you speak. Then second is you need to be very relevant. You need to understand what you are speaking, who are your audiences, and you also need to be very focused on the content with suitable examples. Then you need to be very concise. Too much of information is also not good, so making sure that your brief, the information is very focused, and it should also be very impactful, and making sure that it is interesting, because you need to hold on to your audiences while they are listening. So maybe telling stories, or maybe quotes, or adding some kind of humor to your speech will only add more interest. Making sure that it is balanced, that is logical information as well as emotional appeal is also important. Then audience, you need to understand who your audiences are. You need to understand their needs and expectations, that is what they are expecting from you. Then it has to be neutral. You need not give judgmental speeches. It has to be unbiased, and it has to be fair, and as far as possible it should be non-judgmental. And of course it should be interactive, meaning to say a speech is only, you as a speaker, you would be more successful, I would say, when you have an interactive audience wherein you are encouraging participation, asking questions, and they are replying to you, or they are answering your questions. Then moving on, you have privilege and defamatory speech. So freedom of speech is something that we see, but you have the right to express ideas and then share information, and it is not absolute. It is subject to legal restrictions like libel and slander, or privacy, security, etc. Then you have privileged speech, wherein you have special legal protection that is given to certain people, and this is enjoyed by legislators, judges, lawyers, journalists, witnesses, or during their duty. And the statement made is usually official in nature, and they are protected, and they cannot be treated as defamation, and privilege is usually limited and can be lost outside the protected context. Then defamatory speech is something wherein false statements that can damage the reputation of individual or organization. Then it is basically made with a malicious intent, and it is communicated to the public, and it results in harm to reputation. Then you have libel versus slander. Libel is written or published defamation, and slander is basically spoken defamation, that is both civil wrongs under the defamation law. Then you have written communication. Written communication is through written, that could include letters, documents, emails, SMS, and it is more effective. It depends on clarity, grammar, vocabulary, and style, and there is no support of tone or body language. That is basically you are communicating through words. Written communication has 7 C's, that are clarity, completeness, concise, consideration, correctness, courtesy, and completeness. And the forms of media of written communication: print media is memos, notices, letters, circulars, and electronic media is emails, instant messages, chat, social platforms like Instagram, WhatsApp, social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, etc. Then talking about the common tools of written communication, like I told you, they are memo, which is mostly internal office communication. Then you have letter, which is formal administrative correspondence. Then you have notice, which is for public information display. Then you have circular, that is policy, rule, communication to groups. You have reports, which is mostly organized, and there is analysis and findings in those reports. Emails are something that are very fast, flexible, and attachments can also be done. It could be in the form of reports or pictures, etc. Then you have instant messages, also wherein real time communication is taking place through internet. Then you have press release, that is basically media communication. Then you have brochures and advertisement, which are usually done for promotion and marketing. Then you have newsletters and magazines, wherein you have a lot of engagement from employees and customers. Then you have website and social media, wherein information is shared and branding is done for the for your product. Or then moving on, let's quickly run through what are the merits and demerits of written communication. Merits are, it is something that is permanent in nature, which can be stored, retrieved, and duplicated. Then we have legal evidences that these written documents can serve as a valid proof in courts in case of any disagreements or any legal problems. Then it is also suitable for complex messages, wherein it is something that is very lengthy, detailed, and data based communication. Then it also fixes responsibility, because you are usually signing the documents, so you have clear accountability of who is responsible for the messages or for the communication that was done. And of course, it builds organizational image also, wherein there is a lot of professional image through design, layout, and branding. Then the demerits of written communication is that it is not suitable for illiterate people, because it requires them to read and understand. Then it is also very time consuming, because a lot of preparation has to be done, editing has to be done, and you need to take proper approval from people. Then it is also impersonal, that is, there is no personal touch in written communication, and there is no emotional expressions also. Then it is less confidential, that is, information or documents can be misused as well. Then there is a lot of problem with the storage. If you have big space, then it is okay, but if not, then managing storage would be problematic. Then it is costly, because there has to be printing that needs to be done using computer, stationery, etc. Then you have delayed feedback. You might not immediately get the feedback from the receiver. Right. Then it also requires writing skills, that is, it requires clarity, language proficiency, and proper accuracy in terms of your grammar. With this, we come to an end of our session. So in the end, I would say that effective communication is backbone of effective communication is the backbone of successful personal and professional interaction. Understanding these channels of communication, their types, and appropriate use will help us to ensure timely and meaningful exchange of information. Whether it is oral or written communication, they both play vital roles and with distinctive advantages and their limitation. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have understood what are channels of communication, what are the advantages and disadvantages of verbal, non-verbal communication, oral and written communication. Thank you so much.